I say this every year, but this year was the best VBS we've ever had. Thank you to all the volunteers, for all of you that contributed to it. It was an incredible week of almost 200 kids getting to hear about Jesus all week, so it was amazing. I want to draw your attention to one more thing before I jump into the message today. When you were on your way in, you should have been handed a flyer. We have adopted a school, and if you're not aware of that, it's one of the things we do here locally in our community just to meet needs. This is a school where the kids, the teachers, they don't have very much. And so these are ways that we can be the church with no strings attached and just love and serve our community and be out there. Instead of just saying that we believe in Jesus, we can actually go love like Jesus loved. And so most of you know the drill, but if you're new, you get those items, you bring them back next Sunday, or you bring them to the office during the week, and we just really provide for this school in a way that they don't get a lot of provision. So we would love to be the church to them. Today we're continuing in our series that we've called One Another. Remember from week 1, Jesus said that the world will know that we are his followers by the way that we love one another. Not just what we believe, not just what we say with our mouths, not just what we post on social media, but the way that we treat one another. Which is why we're spending some time this month focusing on what is called the one another's. There's about 59 of them in the New Testament, and these are instructions given to Christians for how to interact with one another, how to treat one another, how to relate to one another. Jesus didn't just stress the importance of how we treat each other, but he gave us these specific ways that we are to do that. And today, I get to unpack one of the most countercultural ones that we find in the New Testament. Before we do, though, let me ask you kind of a strange question. Whose voice do you still hear? Just think about that for a minute. Whose voice do you still hear in your mind even though it spoke words over you years ago? Maybe your mom or your dad. Maybe it was a teacher or a coach that you had years ago, or an old boss. Might have been a pastor. Maybe even an ex-spouse. Why can you still hear their voice in here so clearly 20 years later? There's a reason for that, and it's because our words that we speak, every time we speak, they either carry honor or dishonor when they come out of our mouth. And honor is this thing that has a way of echoing through someone's entire life. It makes more of an impact than people think, and yet we don't talk about this subject of honor very much anymore. There are people sitting in this room today, if we're being completely honest, who are still trying to recover from one sentence that was spoken over them a while ago. There are people also sitting in this room today whose lives were forever changed in a good way because someone was willing to speak one sentence over them years ago. And the challenging question that I want to put in front of you today before we dig in is, which type of person are you becoming? What do the words sound like that come out of your mouth? Do you spend more of your time in life honoring others or dishonoring others, sometimes without even knowing it? You could ask it this way: when was the last time that someone honored you? Not complimented you, not thanked you, honored you. Like made you feel seen, made you feel valued, made you walk away thinking, you know what? After talking to that person, I feel like I matter. It's amazing how we never forget these people. I can still remember people who believed in me before I believed in myself. I can still remember where I was standing. I can still remember what it felt like. I can still remember some of the exact words that they spoke over my life or into my heart. I can still remember how it felt. Why? Because honor, this thing called honor, it actually has incredible power. Now you think about the opposite. Can you remember someone who embarrassed you years ago, or ignored you, talked down to you, or made you feel small? Some of us remember those moments just as clearly. Words can shape decades, just a few words of someone's life. A moment of honor can change the direction of someone's life. I've seen it. And at the same time, a moment of dishonor can leave a wound that someone still has to feel like they need to recover and heal from decades later. This isn't just psychology, by the way. This is how God designed it. This is how he made us. And he has a lot to say about how we honor others and how we use our words. This is how he works too, by the way. He modeled it. He was the example before he tells us to do it. Throughout Scripture, God actually has a habit. He has a pattern of speaking identity over people before they actually become that thing. He tells them who they are or who they're going to be before their behavior actually catches up to it, because he knows there's power in that. And sometimes what you speak over somebody is what they end up becoming, whether it was honoring or dishonoring. I'm going to go through a few examples later, but Gideon was one who was hiding in fear at the very moment that God called him a mighty man of valor. See, we would have looked at his life and said, well, he's a coward. But in that moment while he was hiding, God called him mighty man of valor. We'll talk about Peter in a few minutes, but the point is God has always spoken to people, not simply according to who they are, but according to who he sees that they're going to become. See, honor has this power to call out greatness in people, and yet so few of us use it. And this is one of the reasons that as I started to unpack this one another and everything that the scripture has to say about it and all the examples, I got pretty concerned. I got to be honest with you. There's parts of this message that might be a feel-good message, but this is one of those that's going to be challenging because it challenged me so much that now I have to bring it and challenge you with it. We've become incredibly comfortable as a people in our culture at dishonoring people. We're very good at it. It's very easy for us. Have you noticed how rare this thing called honor has actually become? Like, we live in a world that is so good at criticism and so good at being cynical. And even Christians, like, we criticize people constantly on a daily basis. Some of us, we criticize politicians and celebrities and pastors and churches and restaurants, and everywhere we go, we're criticizing things. We criticize complete strangers that we've never even met and we don't know their story or what they've been through. We live in an outrage economy. We live in a culture that just loves to get likes and clicks and reposts and get attention for ourselves by tearing somebody else down. And here's the problem, and this is why I'm coming at this full force today, because it's present in my own life and it's present in many of our lives, and we have to talk about it as a church, because if we're not careful, this thing called criticism, it actually becomes some of our native tongue. And when criticism becomes your native language, you don't just criticize people online anymore, hiding behind the screen like a coward. Now you start to criticize your spouse every day, or your kids, or your coworkers, or your church, or your friends. See, we've become experts at seeing what's broken, and we're such amateurs at seeing what's beautiful. And that's a problem. We got to figure that out. It's not how God created us to be. We also live in a culture, here's another reason for it, where I think everybody is taught that we just need to go after honor, and we need to achieve honor, and we need to receive honor all the time, like build a platform, gain a following, get noticed, get recognized, be seen by everybody, perform. Our coworkers, our church, our friends, everybody. And the problem is we're all about receiving honor as a culture and as a people and as individuals, but then we're very poor at intentionally giving honor away. And yet every single person that you meet this week, whether you realize it or not, that you come in contact with, they are silently asking a question when they come in contact with you: do I matter? And honor is the thing that actually answers that question. That's how you respond. I was thinking about this early this week, and I was thinking about this thought. Imagine what would happen if followers of Jesus became the best honor givers in the world. I was just thinking about that for a minute. Like, what if we became known as Christians not for being the loudest voices, but for being the people who consistently made other people feel valued and seen and loved by honoring them? Remember what Jesus said. He said, "The world will know you are my disciples by these things." And what if one of the greatest ways that the world's going to actually recognize Jesus in us is not because of the things we think it's because of? And it was into that kind of world that the Apostle Paul writes one of the most surprising, abnormal commands in all of Scripture when you look at the world around us. He doesn't simply say, honor one another like he used the language in some of the other ones. The way he words it is actually, outdo one another in showing honor. That's how he says it. So think about that for a minute. He's telling us as Christians to compete with each other in who's showing the most honor to one another. That's what he's actually saying. How many of you are competitive? Like people don't like to play games with you because you're so competitive. Me too. What if we actually funneled that and channeled that competitive nature, and it didn't have to be a bad thing? What if we actually got competitive with how we honor other people around us? That's basically what Paul is saying here. He's telling Christians to compete. This is a good thing to compete on, not over who's the smartest, not over who's the most successful or who's the strongest or who's the best at something, not who gets recognized. Compete over how to honor one another most. Can you imagine a church like that? Can you imagine a family living in a home like that? Can you imagine a workplace like that where some of the people were doing that, literally competing with each other to see if they could outdo each other and showing honor to each other? Let's see what Paul had in mind when he was writing this. If you want to turn to Romans chapter 12, I'm going to read you a little chunk here. And the context of this part is the Apostle Paul is basically describing to the church, to the Christians, what a transformed life looks like. So when you come to Jesus Christ, when you've been saved by his grace, when you've declared your faith in Christ, okay, you become a Christian, he's painting a picture of what that life is now supposed to look like. It's not supposed to look like it used to look. It's not supposed to do things the same way that it used to do things. When the gospel gets deep down into that person's heart and begins changing the way they live, then it's not just lip service. It's not just saying, yeah, I believe in Jesus. It's not just saying, yeah, Jesus is great. No, it's actually changing the very way that we live and treat others. So he goes through this list. Let me read some of it to you. He says, let love be genuine, not fake. He says, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. And then here's verse 10. Love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. Let me read you some more. He also says it would look like this if you're a Christian, if your life is changing. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. He says, bless those who persecute you, bless and don't curse them. That involves the words too. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Here's one for some of us. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. I love this one. If possible, meaning it's not always possible, so far as it depends on you, because it actually is a two-person game, live peaceably with all. Means you can't always, but sometimes you can. As far as it depends on you, at least, live peaceably with everybody. And this is an incredible picture that he's listing out of what it looks like to really be a Christian that's been changed by the gospel and what the life is supposed to look like. It's not just a random list of Christian behaviors. He's describing an entirely new way of living, a different way of seeing people, a different way of responding to people and treating people, a different way of representing Jesus in the world, that if you do these things, they will know that you are my disciples. That's the proof of it, the evidence of it. But I want to zoom in on just one phrase here. So let's put verse 10 back on the screen for a minute. It says, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Unusual that command is. So Paul doesn't say, honor one another when they've earned it. He doesn't say, honor the people who agree with you. He doesn't even say, honor the people who honor you first. He simply says, outdo one another in showing honor. Almost like he's saying, I want Christians to compete in this one. Not over who's the smartest, not over whoever checks the most boxes or who's the most gifted. Compete to see who can make the other person feel the most valued. And there's a word in here. It's the word I've been saying for the last 10 minutes again and again and again. It's a word that I don't hear us use very often anymore in the church as Christians in the world today. It's the word honor. And I think most of us, when we hear that word, we think of military honor and honoring our parents and showing respect. And those things aren't wrong. Those are ways of showing honor. We should do those things. But I think Paul is talking about something here that's so much richer. It's so much deeper. So after studying it for a while, this would be a biblical definition of honor, if you want to write this down, okay? Honor is recognizing the God-given value in another person. The God-given value. It's treating people according to the value that God has already placed on them. If you want another one, here's a second one. Honor is seeing people the way Jesus sees people and treating them accordingly. When's the last time you woke up in the morning and prayed before your feet hit the floor? Jesus, would you give me the eyes you have for people today? That anybody I come in contact with, I want to see them as you see them and treat them accordingly. Now, before I dig in further, I know what some of you are thinking. So I'm going to get ahead of it a little bit because some of you are thinking, well, Jared, come on, like, I hear you saying that, but not everybody deserves that. Exactly. That's the point. That's grace. If honor only belonged to people who deserved it, then none of us would have received it from God, and yet he honored us. So the question becomes, how do we honor, or why do we honor difficult people? Because I don't feel like doing that. Why do we honor challenging people or offensive people? Because that's the last person I feel like honoring. Why do we honor people who frustrate us, or people who disagree with us, or people who are rude, or people who vote differently than us, people who don't treat us as well as we'd like to be treated? Why do we honor them? And the reason is found all the way back in the book of Genesis, but it's repeated throughout the New Testament. It's because they are, more than anything else, image bearers. Every one of them has been made in the image of God, it says, Genesis 1:26. Every single person that you meet this week has been created in the image of God, he says. And don't miss this. That doesn't mean that everything they do is honorable. It doesn't mean you're honoring their behavior. It doesn't mean you're honoring their sin. It doesn't mean you're celebrating sin or affirming what's not okay. It doesn't mean we ignore the truth. It doesn't mean that we affirm any decision or lifestyle that doesn't honor God. It simply means any person that you come in contact with this week or see across the street, they possess a God-given dignity that deserves to be recognized because they were made in the image of the Father. Honor, in the biblical form, it doesn't pretend that people are perfect. It chooses to treat people like they matter. And once you see people that way and you start to do that every day, everything starts to change. So how do we actually become people who not only honor one another, but we become people who try to outdo one another in showing this thing called honor? The first thing I want you to write down here, if we're going to do that, we need to look at Jesus. And here's something that Jesus always did very well. Jesus honored the image of God in people every day. Honor always begins with how you see the person, how you notice them, because you'll never consistently treat someone differently until you first learn to see them differently. It starts with what you're seeing. And that's exactly what Jesus did, by the way. Let me walk you through it. Everywhere he went, he saw people differently than everybody else saw them. When everyone else saw a tax collector, Jesus saw Matthew. Everyone else saw this person with a shameful, crooked profession. Jesus saw the man that would write the first gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, who would travel with him for 3 years and become one of his closest people. When everyone else saw a prostitute, Jesus saw a daughter worth restoring to a different place. When everyone else saw a leper, Jesus saw a man worth touching. When everyone else saw blind Bartimaeus and how he was just interrupting their day all the time, Jesus saw someone worth stopping for and welcomed the interruption. Again and again, Jesus modeled for us seeing value where everybody else saw inconvenience. Why? Because every single person he encountered bore the image of his Father. That's where honor has to begin. If you miss that part, you don't understand that part, you're not going to get to a place where you can show honor well to other people. First, you have to be able to see people appropriately as God sees them. Honor doesn't begin with somebody's personality. That has nothing to do with it. Honor doesn't begin with whether they agree with you. Oh, this person thinks just like me. I'm going to go honor them. Has nothing to do with it. Honor doesn't begin with whether they've earned it. Honor begins with recognizing that every human being that you lock eyes with has been created in the image of God. That's where it starts. Genesis tells us that from the very beginning. Every man, every woman, every child, every person that you'll pass this week at the grocery store, every coworker, every neighbor, every difficult family member, every person sitting beside you in traffic, no matter how they drove, every single one bears the fingerprints of God on their life. They've been made in his image. Now again, let me just disclaimer this and throw this caveat out there. That again does not mean that everyone is living like Jesus. That does not mean everybody's saved. It does not mean we affirm everything people do. It doesn't mean we ignore sin. It simply means every person possesses that God-given dignity because they've been made in his image. And God has declared someone valuable enough to create, and so who am I to treat them as if they have no value? That's why honor is not pretending people are perfect. It's choosing to treat people like they matter. That's honor. So let me ask you a more pointed question that gets really practical. When people walk into a room, what do your eyes naturally notice first? When someone walks into the room you're in, what do your eyes see first? Or when you walk into a room, what's the first thing that your eyes notice? Do you notice what's wrong? Do you notice what annoys you? What rubs you the wrong way? Or do you notice how they're different from you? Or do you see somebody who's deeply loved by God and has been made in his image, no matter who they are? Because here's what I've discovered about myself. Confession time. This does not come naturally to me. I'm still working on it and I haven't fully arrived. My flesh naturally spots the flaws first. I see what's wrong first. I can see it like that. I can notice what's wrong in 3 seconds. I can find something to criticize almost instantly in any room I'm in. But Jesus has started to train my eyes different, and it's a journey. And I've come a long way from where I was a few years ago, and I'm still working on it. But what he started teaching me is to look past the rough edges and to see somebody that he died for, to see somebody that he loves and cares about. Imagine what would happen if all of us as Christians actually started looking at people that way. Imagine walking into work tomorrow morning and thinking, man, every person in this office bears the image of God. Imagine walking into your classroom when summer's over, young people, and you realize everybody in this classroom today bears the image of God. Not asking who deserves my attention everywhere you walk into. Not asking who's going to notice me, but who has God placed in front of me to honor today? What if you ask that question? Because every person that you'll meet this week, again, whether you think so or not, they're silently asking a question, whether they even realize it or not. Do I matter? Honor answers the question. And before honor ever speaks, before it ever encourages or celebrates, the first thing it does is it sees. Honor sees. You have to learn to see. Honor notices. Honor slows down enough to see. It pays attention. And one of the first things it sees when it sees a person is it sees the image of God. It sees that dignity and that worth and that value. That word honor in the original language, if you go to the definition, it means something of extreme value or worth, to assign worth and value to something. And once you begin seeing people that way, you'll never treat them the same again. It starts to change how you live and how you interact with others. The second big thing I want you to write down is Jesus also spoke honor into people. Once Jesus saw value in people, he didn't keep it to himself, he spoke it. And so you say, well, hey, I can just honor people by the way that I live. No, words are required. I'm just gonna put that out there. I don't wanna use words. No, words are part of the formula. To honor someone, it requires more than words, but it requires words. Have you ever noticed Jesus as our ultimate example, our model, how intentional he was with his words? He didn't just see potential, he called it out of people. He didn't just see value in people, he spoke value over people when they thought they had none. One of my favorite examples is Simon Peter, right? Simon was impulsive In some ways, you could say he was unstable. He was always putting his foot in his mouth. He would always speak before he thought. He would act out before he prayed. He was all over the place. And what does Jesus do? Jesus changes his name. Before he even shifted out of that identity to do the good stuff, he says, "You're Peter, now you're called the Rock." That's what Peter means. That was before, a few chapters later, when Peter denied Jesus 3 times when he was on his way to the cross. See, Jesus speaks to who Peter is becoming, not who Peter is today. And then Peter rose into that. I love that because Jesus has this pattern of speaking identity over people before the behavior catches up, okay? Think about Gideon. I mentioned him earlier. He's hiding, he's cowering in fear, and yet God speaks out of the darkness and says, "You're a mighty man of valor." That's how he addresses him. Keep reading, he becomes that. Think about Zacchaeus. Everyone else just saw a crooked tax collector. Jesus saw a son of Abraham. That's what he called him. You think about the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. Some of you know that story. Everyone else saw an outcast. Jesus looked at her, and you know what he called her? He said one word. He said, "Daughter." The one thing that nobody else had called her. Everyone else staying away from her, keeping their distance from her, calling her unclean, saying she's dirty, she's untouchable, she's unwanted. And Jesus sees her and speaks one word. He says, "Daughter." She probably hadn't been called a daughter in 12 years. See, the thing about honor, and this is why I'm learning to love it, is honor has a way of restoring what shame has stolen. There's some things that shame has stolen from you. There's some things that shame has stolen from me. Honor is the thing that restores it, and you have the power, the ability to use it to restore those things in other people. It's a big deal. This is why our words matter so much, because people become what they're consistently called. I've seen it time and time again. There's studies done on this. You tell a child long enough that they're stupid, eventually they believe they're stupid even when they're not. You tell them long enough that they're gifted, they begin to rise up into that identity and believe it. This is real. You want me to bring this up in marriage? Because I need this too. You tell your spouse often enough, "I appreciate you, I believe in you, this is the man I see in you, this is the woman I see in you, I'm thankful for you." Watch what begins to happen in them instead of the constant criticism. People flourish when honor is present. It's a breeding ground for people to thrive. It's a breeding ground for people to rise up into new places that they maybe didn't even see that they could. The opposite, though, is true too, so we have to talk about that. Constant criticism shrinks people. Constant dishonor causes people to withdraw and pull back from the very people they should be close to. It creates insecurity and fear and distance. Again, the question, whose voice do you still hear? There's a reason you still hear it. It's because words carry tremendous power. In the book of Proverbs, I've read this many times to you, it tells us death and life are in the power of the tongue. That your words are powerful. That's from the book of wisdom. Every conversation you have with somebody is an opportunity. Every interaction is a chance to either speak life or reinforce shame. Can I ask you a more pointed question? What do people feel when they leave a conversation with you? Let me say it again. What do people feel when they leave a conversation with you? When people leave a conversation with you, do they feel lighter or heavier? Do they feel like every time that you talk to them, the conversation is 100% about you? Or is there any honoring involved? When they leave a conversation with you, do they feel encouraged or do they feel analyzed? Like you're just looking at them like this the whole time, trying to figure them out. You know that look, some of you? The whole time you're talking, you're just looking at it like that? When they leave a conversation with you, do they feel noticed? Or do they feel like you noticed everything wrong with them? Or that you noticed everything God's doing in them? What do you notice? And what do they feel that you notice? Here's something the Lord has been teaching me lately. It's so easy to point out people's flaws. It's so simple. Anybody can criticize. Anybody can complain. Anybody can whine. Anybody can tear someone down. You know what the harder thing is, even when the person doesn't deserve it, is build them up. And yet that's what we're called to, time and time again. Followers of Jesus are called to do the far more difficult thing as we interact with people. We're called to call out the image of God in the image bearers, which are all people. We're called to call out the gifts that God has placed in each other. We're called to call out the faithfulness that we see growing in people, even if it's just starting to grow from a seed. We're called to call out people's courage, generosity, kindness, the potential we see in them. You know, our culture has become really good at calling people out. Jesus calls his church to become really good at calling people up. That's what we're called to do. Imagine if our church and every church became known for that. Imagine if every Sunday people walked in wondering, who's going to encourage me today? Because every time I walk in here, I get encouraged. Imagine if our homes became places where our spouses and our kids consistently heard us speaking life over them instead of shame, even when they make mistakes. See, honor has a way of multiplying. When you consistently speak life into people, they begin speaking life into others, and before long, it changes more widespread than you think. You could study the early church and how they were actually living this way, living out these 59 one another's, even when it was uncomfortable, and they were all living them so effectively that entire cultures shifted. Sometimes whole cities changed. It's an incredible thing to go study. That's exactly why Paul had to have this in mind and to remind them, outdo one another in showing honor. The third thing we see is this: Jesus used his position to lift others up. He put others before himself. He chose to elevate other people to places that they didn't even necessarily deserve, even when he, if you missed last week, would sometimes lower himself to the place of a servant. Do you know why? Because honor isn't just something you say, although it requires words. Honor is also something you demonstrate. So you don't just say it, you also live it out. And one of the things I love most about Jesus is that he never simply told people that they mattered. He treated them like they mattered. He made time for people that nobody else made time for, and he paused and stopped and spent time with them. He stopped for people who everybody else hurried by. He touched people that everybody else avoided from a distance. He ate with people that nobody else would dine with. He welcomed people everybody else overlooked. Again and again and again, Jesus interrupted his own schedule to elevate somebody else. It's his MO. And then he looked at his disciples, by the way, and he said, now you guys go do likewise. I'm modeling it for you. Now you go do it. Think about this as the church, as Christians. Jesus never had to prove his importance by making other people feel less important. He was completely secure in who he was. He knew his identity. He knew who he belonged to, which meant he was completely free and felt completely free to elevate everybody else around him, to put others before himself. And you know what I've learned over the years? And this is common knowledge. Anybody who studied it knows it, but I've seen it firsthand time and time again, even in myself. Insecure people have to put other people down to feel like they're standing taller. That's where that comes from. And sometimes the person doing the putting down doesn't even realize that's where it's coming from, but that's where it's coming from every single time. Because people who are secure in their identity and know who they are, they don't put other people down. It's sometimes even a subconscious way of making yourself feel bigger. The flip side of that is also true, that secure people can lift other people up because they know who they are. If you know who you are, you can spend way more time lifting other people up, and it doesn't affect you in any negative way. That's exactly what Jesus did. He never lost anything by honoring somebody else, and neither will you. One of my favorite verses that connects all of this is in Philippians chapter 2. Paul says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Think about that. Paul is not saying that other people are more valuable than you. He's not saying that other people matter more than you. He's not saying that other people are better than you. He's saying treat them as though they are more important than yourself. That's honor. That's honor. Honor walks into a room looking for someone to celebrate instead of something to criticize. Honor walks into a room listening more than it speaks. Honor gives away the better seat even though you wanted to sit in it. Honor applauds someone else's success even if you had a failure. Honor celebrates when somebody gets a promotion. Honor is not threatened when somebody who's not you gets recognition of some kind. That's honor. Why? Because honor, even though we're to compete with each other and outdoing each other in it, that's the competition. Honor itself is not a competition, it's a gift that's freely given and received. So let me ask you some more pointed questions. I had to ask myself these too. When someone else succeeds, what is your first reaction? Do you celebrate? Good, that's a good reaction. Or do you compare? When someone else is recognized, are you genuinely excited for them? Or do you quietly think, why wasn't that me? That should have been me. When someone else gets to do something that you wish you could do or deeply want to do or feel called to do, and you don't, can you applaud that and be happy for that? Or does it take you down the hill? If we're honest, comparison has become one of the greatest thieves of honor. It steals it constantly. And social media has made it worse. We're constantly comparing, constantly measuring, constantly wondering why somebody else has something that we don't. But here's the beautiful thing about the kingdom of God instead of the kingdom of this world. Here's the difference. There's enough honor to go around. We don't run out of it. It's not a finite resource. When I honor you, I don't lose anything. It doesn't actually pour anything out of me. I can go honor 100 people and I didn't actually lose anything. In fact, what I found as I start practicing it more and more is it actually fills me up. When I celebrate your success, it does not diminish my value. When I encourage you, it does not make me any less important. In fact, it makes me more like Christ when I do those things. Imagine if this became the culture of our church. Imagine if every person who walked through these doors thought, who can I celebrate today? Who can I encourage today? Who can I honor today? Who can I make feel seen today? What if we actually started trying to do this crazy idea, this how do we outdo one another, not in being noticed, but in noticing. Not in receiving honor, but in giving honor away. Can you imagine how refreshing that would be? Can you imagine how changing that would be of the feel of the room, of how people interact, of people's hearts, their future even? In a world that's constantly trying to get ahead, the church would become the people who are asking, how can I lift someone else up? How can I help them get ahead? Because that's what Jesus did. He saw people, he spoke life over people, and then he consistently elevated people above himself. Ultimately, he honored us so much that he laid down his very life so that we could have life. The cross is the greatest act of honor in human history. The greatest act of honor the world has ever seen. When Jesus himself, the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, he looked at broken humanity and declared, you know what, you're worth dying for. You matter enough to me that I'm going to go do this on your behalf. Again, disclaimer, he didn't die for us because we deserved it. He died because that's who he is. And that's the gospel. And when the gospel gets down into our hearts, and it's not just lip service, but we really understand it and feel it, we stop asking who deserves my honor, and we start asking simply, who can I honor today? Because I want to be like Jesus. Because that's exactly what Jesus did for us. So, real quick, before we sing this last song, I just want to sit with this for another minute. I want to feel this together. So think back to that question that I started with. Whose voice do you still hear in your head? Think about it for a minute. I know it's hard for some of you. First of all, for some of you, maybe it was someone who believed in you. Maybe it was someone who spoke life over you, somebody who saw something in you when nobody else saw anything in you. And they said to you out loud, I see something in you. I believe in you. You matter. You still hear their voice today. Why? Because honor echoes long after the words are said. Now, I know we don't want to, but let's think about the other voices for a minute. The ones that wounded you. the ones that you still carry today, the ones that made you question your worth, the ones that some of you are still trying to recover from because there's deep wounds related to them. Here's the point. Never underestimate the power of your words. Be very careful with them. Never underestimate the power of one conversation. Never underestimate the power of one sentence. You know, over 20 years ago, over 22 years ago, I was in a different career path, and I had no intention of becoming a pastor. And it was actually my dream job that I never thought I could land, and everything was going so smooth. And I thought I would just do that for the rest of my life. And then one person said, hey, you know what, Jared? I don't know why I feel led to say this, but I heard you talk about Jesus the other night at that event. And I think that's what you're supposed to do for the rest of your life. I think you're supposed to be a pastor. And sometimes I think about, what if that one person hadn't said that? Could someone else have said it? Yeah. Could God have got me here a different way? Yeah, sure. But sometimes I think about that. What if that one person hadn't honored that thing they saw in me? I might not be here today doing this. There might not be a Rise Church. Honor is something that costs you almost nothing, but it can change everything for somebody else. You don't have to diminish somebody else's value to prove your own. And our world that we live in, it tells us that when someone else rises, somehow we've decreased. And if someone else succeeds, then we've failed. And if someone else is celebrated, then in some way we've been overlooked. Jesus never lived that way. Jesus never had to make someone feel small so that he could feel significant. He knew exactly who he was, so he was fully free to just lift others up. And listen, here's the thing. That's our calling too, as followers of Christ. Here's the last thing that I've discovered. And this is very practical and eye-opening for some people. People rarely rise to the level of our criticism, but they often rise to the level of our belief in them. That goes for your husband, your wife, your kids, that friend you're trying to bring along. I just got to say it honestly and bluntly. I've hardly ever seen anybody rise up to where somebody wants them to be because they responded to criticism. But I've seen people that were at the end of their rope respond to somebody speaking life into them and telling them who they were created to be. And you wouldn't even recognize them anymore in the most beautiful way. What if this week, instead of being people who are always pointing out what's wrong, we become people who are known for calling out what God is doing that we see and we notice it? You know, sometimes I'll meet with somebody or I'll sit with somebody who's just made a big mistake or whatever. And there's others that know they've made this big mistake. And sometimes people will judge me for speaking so much life into that person. But you know what? I've been doing this long enough to know that that's what does the trick. And it's the thing God most uses. And sometimes if we can get out of ourselves and see what God sees and notice that sometimes even in the muddiest, messiest, most painful situations, God is still moving and still working and still bringing everything to redemption, then we can say, okay, God, you move and tell me what you need from me. And I trust you. I trust you with my life and I trust you with this person's life. Because at the end of the day, honor is one of the most practical ways that we can love one another. Love is not just a feeling. It speaks, it notices, it sees, and it honors. And I have a suspicion that before you walked in here today, some of you, the Holy Spirit was already preparing you because you needed to hear some of this. And I also have a suspicion today that some of you, as I've been talking about this, a name or a face has come to your mind. And I don't know who that is, but you do. And I just want to challenge you with everything in me. If you want to see God move in ways that you've never seen before the sun sets tonight, you have a conversation with that person, or you send them a text message, or you give them a call. Whatever it looks like, I don't. But you speak honor into their life. You speak life to them. Remove yourself and just try to be like Christ by speaking that into them. Because there's somebody this week that's waiting for your words. You might know exactly who they are. You might have no idea who they are. But somebody's waiting for your encouragement. They're waiting for the words that you don't even know matter to them. They're waiting for your belief in them. Somebody is waiting for your honor. Respect is earned. Honor's not earned, it's freely given. You may never preach a sermon from a stage, but this week you might preach one sentence that echoes in somebody's heart for the next 30 years. That's how much power your words have. You want to see change? Start doing that. You may never know the impact. Sometimes you might not even ever get to hear the story. But heaven will. And that's the part that matters. So when you leave this room today, again, don't ask who noticed me. Ask who and what do I need to notice? Don't ask who honored me. Ask who am I going to honor? Don't compete to receive honor and become the honorable whatever. Compete to give honor away and outdo one another in showing honor, because that's exactly what Jesus did for you. And if enough followers of Jesus begin living that way, our homes will change, our marriages will change, our workplaces will change, our churches will change, and whole communities can change. Mark my words. And maybe, just maybe, the world will begin to recognize the Jesus that we love so much because his people have become the best honor givers on the planet. Let's become that kind of church. Will you stand and sing?